And so if something starts to show up in your life, it's giving you a clue. Like, remember I mentioned the pain, right? If the pain starts showing up more than once, you have to start asking yourself, what is this trying to teach me, right? What is it? And again, you may not be able to do it by yourself. It may take an outside perspective, somebody who's willing to be honest in your life. Could be a friend, it could be a family member, or it could be somebody you hire professionally to help you see it, right? Because sometimes we get so lost in our own viewpoint, we can't see other views.
Well, hello! Another episode of The Rooted Founder. I am super excited about this one. I'm here with Chris Miles, and he is committed to helping people create freedom and prosperity. And how he's going about doing it is really interesting, and we'll probably tap into that. But what I find most fascinating about him is his journey of entrepreneurialism and investing and the highs and lows and that whole process. So we're going to dive into his journey, what that looks like, and I know there's going to be nuggets in there for you. So Chris, super excited to have you here.
I'm super excited to be here. Like I've been wanting to be here for months. And so just to be on the show is totally an honor.
Oh, love it. Well, I want to start by framing it with you've experienced some success in what I call eyes open success. Time freedom, financial freedom, location freedom. You've also, in that journey of earning those eyes open wins, you've earned some eyes closed freedoms, joy, love, peace, connection. And in my entrepreneurial journey, and in a lot of the people I talk to, sometimes in our pursuit of the eyes open freedoms, we sacrifice the eyes closed freedoms. And I'm curious if in any point in your life, you have sought more dollars, more followers, more eyes open wins, and then had to go reconcile in the cobwebs of your heart at any point.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, the good news is I wasn't blessed with prosperity quickly. So I realized, pretty early on that principles come first, strategy second. And that one of the main principles that helps create wealth for anybody, it's been proven since the beginning of time, is that dollars follow value, right? That value follows value, really, for that matter. And so if you want to earn more money, you got to figure out how to create more value for more people. How do you serve them? How do you solve problems for them and show up and add value in their lives that they're better off with you than without you, right? That's the real key of wealth in anything. But I'll tell you, like sometimes, especially someone like me, where especially when you have those childhood traumas and things like that, and sometimes childhood traumas can become business traumas too, right? And when you're someone like me, where you feel like you have to prove your love, right? You have to earn your love, right? You got to do something to be enough, things like that. Well, then it can, although it looks great on the outside, because it looks like, oh, that person's such a go giver, right? They're such a there's such a servant heart, all that kind of stuff. But that's good. You can do that, but you can do it to an unhealthy level too. And I'll give you an example. About 10 years ago, it's a little after I launched this business, Money Ripples. I've been in business for over 20 years. But I remember I was going through a business coaching program. And in the process of that, I had this dream. And it was a dream almost like if you've been to Disneyland, how like there's like the main street, bricks, laid streets and things like that. And there's like the lamp posts and, it's very, very Hollywood-esque, right? It's a very La La Land almost, right? And so I was there, and understand that as part of my many diverse background, when I went to college, I was a sociology major, but I had a triple minor in Japanese, ballroom dancing, and psychology, right? So I was one of the nation's top amateur ballroom dancers at one point 20 years ago. And so I'm having this dream that I'm on this kind of like Main Street parade type thing or whatever. And there's all these dancers. We're all, doing our thing like formations and whatnot. And we hit our final pose and everybody around the street starts clapping. It's nighttime setting with the lampposts all lit up and everything. I'm like, hey, if you think that's great, come in here, learn how to free up cash flow and have more freedom. And, and I go into the other room and it's set up with a cameraman in the back. There's a nice auditorium and it's just me and the cameraman. Like nobody's there. And I woke up disturbed from that dream. And I'm one of those people, I don't have vivid dreams. If I remember a dream, there's a reason, because I don't remember dreams very often. And I remember waking up thinking like, oh my gosh, I'm just doing a song and dance. because I would go speak at events and things like that. And I would have a coughing fit afterwards because I would almost have like this Gollum cough, like from Lord of the Rings. I would just be like coughing like crazy, like a lungs coming out of me every time I got off stage, only realizing later as I'm doing like, meeting with different mentors and energy workers, things like that, hey, you're rejecting yourself. That's why. And so I was feeling I wasn't enough. So I tried to over deliver. I tried to be extra entertaining, extra funny, and all this stuff to try to impress people and just so I could serve them more, only to realize I was exhausting and burning myself out, and it was interesting because I had to, go through a divorce, just a few years after that. And during that time, like I kind of reinvented myself a little bit more. I started to ask myself, like, what am I doing? Why am I even going through this? And I was already rebuilding from the last recession, right? Where I went from millionaire to upside down millionaire in that. And I was trying to pay off over $1 million in debt and I was on my way to doing it. But now I'm going through a divorce. So it's like hit the reset button one more time. And as I went through that, I realized like, wait a minute, like who do I really want to be? If I were to rebuild my business to actually serve the people I want to serve, not just try to serve anybody. And if I were to really focus on that, not just the Pareto's principle, the top 20% of the clients, but who's my top 20% of my top 20%, which is your top 4% that makes 96% of your revenue, right? And I started focusing there, and I started focusing on just my podcast. I stopped speaking all over on a bunch of different stages. I stopped trying to go to all these networking groups all over the place. And, great, you feel good because you make some buddies, but you're not making any more money. Like you're not really doing anything productive, really. And I started cutting all that stuff out. I went from 50 hours a week down to about 5 hours or so a week, but I doubled my revenue. And not to mention my profit, like 8x'd, right? It got way, way bigger. So as a result, I felt way better. Like I started to become more like who I was meant to be versus just trying to be somebody else, right? And that's I think where it's really key. People talk about authenticity all the time, but they don't always know what that means, and I didn't either. But it truly is like working within your strengths, but also releasing those traumas, because those traumas can sometimes be hidden within success, right? Some of the most successful people I know and mastermind groups, even like these real estate groups I'm part of, they're driven out of fear of poverty. They're driven out of, not out of faith, they're driven out of fear. And you can't live that way long term.
Oh my gosh, I don't even know where to start with your journey. I can resonate with it personally so much. And you and I were chatting a little bit before about a lot of people hitting a similar ceiling right now. And I have this personal belief that every human at some point hits an enough is enough point in their life. And I think growth-oriented people probably hit it multiple times in their life because we are continually pushing the envelope. And when you personally hit that enough is enough, like I cannot keep operating like this. Either my business is chaotic or my relationship is fractured or my finances are over leveraged. Whatever the scenario is, you hit it. And you feel in those moments, you feel like your world is falling apart. And in a way, it's the psychological construct that is just dissolving.
Yeah.
And when that happens, it's scary. It feels like you're losing control and you feel like vulnerable and shamed. Like you can look back from that seat and see like, oh man, 10 moves ago, I probably should have made this choice. But you're sitting with the situation that you're in. And how do you hold yourself with grace and truth, like the unconditional grace that you're whole and you're complete and you're enough, and you don't have to perform, you don't have to prove anything, and the other truth, the hard truth of you're inadequate. There's some things you did that you gotta remedy. Like, how did you hold yourself in that spot and rebuild your life? Because you rebuilt it and you did a pretty successful job of that, eyes closed and eyes open. So what did that look like for you, practically or tactically?
Well, the truth is I'm always rebuilding, I mean, like just this year I started getting, a lot deeper. I mean, I did some hypnotherapy before, but I finally found somebody where it clicked. And a lot of that childhood trauma came up again. Right. And I thought I'd resolved it before, but then I realized, no, I was carrying that into my relationships, like I was feeling like I had to like overserve in my marriage and things like that. And and all those things that you're trying to do, and it can wear you out. And that's the thing, when burnout is really just evidence that you're somehow not in alignment with yourself, right?
Mm.
And it's not something that says you should just quit. It's just saying, hey, you need to pay attention, wake up. It's like when you get pain in the body, usually by the time you get pain, it's already after something's been bothering you. You just didn't know it for a while, and then it surfaces as pain. And sometimes the pain shows up in a place that's not even the same place, right? Like for example, I'm a marathoner now. I stopped ballroom dancing and now I'm a marathoner. And people would say like, oh, like, don't you have knee pain? I said, oh yeah, I did at one point, but it wasn't my knees. It had nothing to do with my knees. It was actually had to do with the muscles. My adductor muscles were pulling up, or like on my IT bands or whatever it was. Like it was other muscles higher up pulling, and I just happened to feel a pain at the connection point, right? And emotionally and in our lives, that's the same thing, is that we're always trying to peel back the layers and really find like what's the source, what's the cause, right? What's really happening. And so to do it with grace, I think you have to understand that, one, you're part of the human club, right? That
Mm.
we're all going to be imperfect. Nothing's ever going to be, we're not, born with like, this amazing wisdom and that we have everything figured out. I really think a big part of life is just figuring ourselves out, right? I think that's kind of the one way to get greater fulfillment is, do I really truly understand who I am and how I can be happy? And as a result, I can also help others be happy too. I can't make them be happy, but I can create better conditions to give them permission to feel like they can be happy too, right? And so it's really about trying to keep having grace, knowing that you are imperfect, like you were saying, right? Being patient, which sucks a lot of times because I breezed through my story a little bit, but I mean, that's years and years of it. And even then, there's still things uncovering and still new things that come up. It's like, sometimes you peel back a layer and you realize there's something else under there, right? And you keep peeling back more layers. There's more things there. You're just scratching the surface a lot of times. And so the best thing is just to really seek out for help. Don't do it alone. That's one thing I wish I would have done in the last recession, is that I was suffering alone, thinking I didn't want to spread it as a disease. But the truth is, like, if you're struggling with something, find someone to help you through it, even if it means you have to pay somebody, right? Whatever it might be, and just focus on that and really just work on one thing at a time. It's not going to resolve everything overnight, but just doing a little bit, just like I mentioned before, when I was able to just start building my business and working with people that I want to work with, not trying to justify just to make more money. And I started to serve people I really want to serve. And I stopped trying to pretend as much. And that's still with me trying to overserve, but I wasn't trying to pretend as much. That's when everything turned around in my business, right? And so you can have levels of success and you'll have things that will give you signs to say, hey, this is working. But I just realized, like, really, when it came to my own situation, right? I saw a certain level of success, but there was always new things that popped up and new things to overcome. And having that excitement, really being excited to just attack the next thing, right? And it's going to hurt, like it always does. Oh, I remember when I was ballroom dancing, I was training, and I got on the world championship team here in Utah, and I thought it was pretty good stuff. Yeah, I'll tell you. I mean, I thought if I got to that point, and this was after really only just a little over 2 years of ballroom dancing training, like I only did it in college. There's other people on that same team have been doing it since they're like 4 years old, right? And so to get on that team, I'm feeling pretty good. But then I remember there was an instructor at that same university, and she said, Chris, you're good, but you're not great. Now, she was really good in the fact that she wasn't like as harsh as like the coach was on that team. He was a jerk, but she was very optimistic when she would give feedback. So she's like, Chris, if you just change this one thing, I actually promise you that you'll start to win competitions. And so she's like, and this is something I kind of teach, and I'm even writing a book kind of about this concept, that working smarter is dumb, right? Everybody tells you don't work harder, work smarter, right? But working smarter is not enough, because there's plenty of people out there that have all these resources with Google and everything else and YouTube, even this podcast, right? They can learn all these things. They can get all the shelf help they want, but until you work it right, nothing matters. And so she's like, Chris, you've been working hard, you've been practicing, you even know the steps and the moves, right? Like you've been working smart, but you're not working right. Chris, you've been missing one essential element, which is your center. Like your center, if you worked on your core, and actually using your core more, like when you're doing like muscle isolations and things like that, she's like, I promise you, everything will be crisper, it'll be sharper, you'll look better. And the judges won't even know why. But she's like, I can just tell that your core, your center is kind of out of whack. You're not keeping it steady. Once you get that center steadied, then everything else follows. And you can kind of see there's almost like symbolism in that, right? Like when you're at the core, when you're steady, right? When you have that fixed, things work. And that's what happened. Like I started winning competitions after that, not because I learned any new steps. It was just I did those steps correctly, or with the whole form and everything working together. And I think that's important too, is that you realize like sometimes it's just the little tweaks. It's just like doing those little things that make it work right. And if you do those kind of things, especially if you're doing this, and it doesn't matter, you can be doing, all your own like I love it when I meet people in the personal development space. I used to work a lot with like a lot of people in the energy work area and stuff. I'd coach a lot of them, and they would always couldn't figure out why they're always broke. They're like, but I manifest money. Like I do all my affirmations and I'm saying that money's coming to me readily and easily, but it doesn't. I'm like, that's because you're not resonating at that energy level. Like you're not, you're trying to hack your way to trying to skip the very things that you need to do, which is you need to serve. And you probably have traumas too, because obviously if anybody's in like, usually in the mental health, health space or things like that, it's probably because you overcome your own messes. And so you're in that space and you've probably overcome a lot, but sometimes those messes are still there. That's still crippling your ability to serve because you believe in scarcity. That, if I make money, then I'm screwing somebody else, versus realizing, if I serve more people and I'm willing to ask to receive and have that full value in the energy exchange, I'm going to receive it, right? It's that law of the harvest, right? You got to plant in order to sow and reap, or you got to reap what you sow, right? And so that's the big thing, is that, you got to make sure you're not rejecting the energy, and you got to make sure you're doing it the right ways.
So in the parallel of the core, like the salsa dancing core, which it's been my dream to do salsa dancing. So if I ever run into you anywhere, we're going to do it because I love salsa dancing and I haven't taken a class yet. But the parallel between core and dancing in your personal identity and your business identity, like how did you translate that?
Translate my business identity? It's because my business really is an extension of me. The business doesn't define me. I define the business. Right? How many times have we run into people that if they leave their business or they sell their business or they, something changes in their life and they transition out of it, they have no clue who they are. Right? And that's where I think it's backwards. Some people say, oh, because, I'm a chiropractor. That's what I do. That's who I am. And if they're not a chiropractor anymore, then they've lost that identity. But that's not it. It's who you are at the core. Like for me, my own, I guess you say my own personal mission statement that goes into every role that I play in my life is that, that I establish higher standards of service, perseverance, and stewardship to create happy, fruitful lives. And I can do that any way I choose. I just happen to choose it in the money game because, I've been very blessed to have a lot of bad money experiences and some good ones. And I have that kind of comeback story, right? A couple times comeback story to be able to show that it actually works, and I can teach it, and that's the other thing too, is I'm a leader and a teacher. I can do that anywhere. I can teach 3-year-olds. And in fact, I had to do it. I remember being in church and they gave me the responsibility to take care of 2-year-olds. So I'm the one guy with all these moms, and the moms would always just be chatting with each other. But I would actually be on the ground with the kids. I'm like, wait a minute, if I'm supposed to like teach, how do I teach a bunch of 2-year-olds? And I was like, oh, get on the ground and just be with them. Right. And it's so funny because I remember like, when I finally like left that class and I dropped my own kids off or something like that, all the other kids would come up to me like this, with their arms up in the air, stretched out, like hoping I would pick them up because they had that connection with me where they didn't have that with the other women. They were great women and they were awesome, but they just didn't have that connection. And so you can do that any role that you play in life, as a parent, as a sibling, as a son or daughter. You can do it even as a stranger on the street, like you can show up and brighten somebody's day doing that. And if you get in the habit of doing those things, you'll realize it will translate into your business too, because it's just becomes it's just who you are. It's who you're being. And then that just shows up in every part of life. And I'll tell you, Staci, like the best compliment I ever received recently was actually from one of my clients where he came to Utah. He flew in for a few days. He said, hey, let's do lunch. And so we went out to lunch. First time I met him face to face. And at probably about 20 minutes or so into lunch, he just said, I'll be honest, I kind of researched you a little bit. He said, because obviously I've heard you from your podcast and everything. I've been following the Money Ripples podcast for a while. He's like, but then I found somebody that I knew that had hired you too. And I asked him, I like, is he really like this, like what you see on the podcast? And my friend said, yes, what you see is what you get. He's like, now that I'm sitting with you at lunch, it's exactly true. Like dorkiness and all, like you are who you really are, like in both places. And for someone who is a people pleaser, especially like I've had that guilty, you know, habit in the past of
Mhm.
doing that, to be able to hear somebody say, no, you are in private the same way as you are in public, everything, that is like probably one of the best compliments I could ever receive.
Mm. Yes. And it's a testament to being in alignment with yourself.
Right.
Like when you hit these enough moments, it's because you're, like you said, you're not in alignment. And then when we have this inner congruence, anything we create from that place is congruent. And
Yeah.
that's reflected back to us. I suffer from the same disease you do, which is people pleasing.
Mm-hmm.
And I have been working diligently, and the way it shows up in my life is I call it the performance perfection. Like when I
Mm.
get to a point at any point in my day or where I feel like, oh, I have to do this, or I will disappoint so and so, or I won't close this deal, or somebody might think this way of me. So I'm going to push through this nudge inside of me that says, like, hey, actually, let's just pause. But my perfection and performance pushes over that and bulldoze my own inner knowing to tell me that I have to go do it. And then you do that long enough, you're going to hit an enough moment because you are self-sacrificing external peace, and that's never really a fair trade.
You're always going to let people down. You're
Yes.
always going to feel like it at least.
Yes, exactly. So
Yeah.
I have hit this many times in my life, this performance perfection trap. And so I'm constantly working on improving my own personal systems for, can I catch these sooner? Like, can I catch myself in misalignment sooner before I get to a point where I feel like, oh, this is just not working? So I'm curious for you, like how you have constructed your own self to flag it, like, hey, I'm a little off track. Like how do you do that for yourself?
That's tough. I mean, I just, I'm trying to remember the name of the book. I've read a lot of books recently, but
Mhm.
um, there's a book that, I think it's The Road Less Stupid by
Mm.
Keith J. Cunningham, right? He talks about thinking time. Like many of us don't spend enough time thinking. And I realize I've been guilty of that too, because I'm just like, hey, let's just get it done. I'm all about efficiency and just getting things moving, right? And then I realized, like, wait a minute, like, do I actually just stop and think for a while? And for me, like a lot of times, like during my workouts is sometimes my best time, because as a runner, sometimes you just kind of zone out and you've got that thinking time a little bit. Other times, like the shower, I call it the shower of power. Like sometimes in the shower is just like the best place to kind of get a little meditation in and really just clear your head. And a lot of times things will enter that will give you that flash of inspiration, right? And that's what happens with me. And to really be listening. It's kind of like what I was telling you before we went on the air, right? Where like I saw you from two different fronts. Like we had a lot of mutual friends. You were interviewing my friends, and then I also saw you on Podmatch, which I'm like, wait a minute, this is the same person,
Mhm.
and and to me, it was like when I see things like that show up more than once, especially within a week, I
Mhm.
take that as get a clue. And
Mhm.
so if something starts to show up in your life, it's giving you a clue. Like remember, I mentioned the pain, right? If the pain starts showing up more than once, you have to start asking yourself, what is this trying to teach me? Right? What is it? And again, you may not be able to do it by yourself. It may take an outside perspective, somebody who's willing to be honest in your life. Could be a friend, could be a family member, or it could be somebody you hire professionally to help you see it, right? Because sometimes we get so lost in our own viewpoint, we can't see other views, right? It's just like earlier today, I was pondering about the dishwasher, right? I have in our house, we have a blended family of 8 children. So I've got 6, she's got 2. And I remember there's one time like I'm trying to show them how to load the dishwasher because I'm all about, hey, you can get them fitting in just right, and you can get the maximum amount of load while they still get clean without covering them up and stuff, right? So I'm doing that, and they're like, and then I see them like try to put the bigger, thicker pans, going not vertical but going horizontal, and I'm like, I'm freaking out. But then, which is weird. I'm not that OCD, but
Yeah.
about dishes, apparently I am. And But then I realized I'm sort of view it. I'm like looking from their perspective. I'm like, wait, actually that's better. I'm not bending the rack, trying to get the fit in just right. And then using like the lid to keep the pan up just right, and trying to prop everything up to do that. Like it just sits there
Yeah.
naturally. Like maybe I'm wrong. And so sometimes it takes another person's perspective to say, have you considered this? And you might want to reject it, right? Because everything feels uncomfortable at first, just like trying to use my core, my center felt uncomfortable at first. And it took somebody else, like the coach, to say, hey, but you're doing it right. Now, you might feel weird, you might feel awkward, but it looks better. Like keep doing it. And once it became a habit and it started to get to the point where it felt more natural, then that's when all of a sudden, like it clicked for me, right? And so it's going to be the same for you. Just because something's uncomfortable doesn't mean it's wrong. Doesn't mean that if something's hard or a challenge for you, doesn't mean it's wrong and you should just go around the obstacle. Sometimes it might just mean you just need to kind of power through a little bit, and have a little patience and grace and be willing to learn and adjust and evolve essentially.
Yeah. Well, first of all, I'm shocked with 8 kids, all the dishes are even getting into the dishwasher, not everywhere else.
Well, you have to do almost every meal just to make it work, right?
My sister has 8 kids, and I was recently helping her out when she had her 8th one. And I'm like, my goodness, that's a lot of dishes.
It is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But yes, I think that sometimes as humans, we over-identify with our perspective. And we
Mm-hmm.
think our perspective is the only perspective. And in different seasons in my life, when I've spent time with Robert and Kim Kiyosaki, they've talked a lot about standing on the edge of the coin and how there's the one side and the other. And the objective is to stand on the edge and be able to hold in our minds both and then integrate them.
Mm-hmm.
And to your point, sometimes it's very, very challenging to do that alone because you don't see your blind spots. You need somebody else to mirror back to you an angle you're missing. And it's not saying that how you're thinking is wrong or the way you're doing it is wrong. It's just maybe there is a way that we could create a stronger core, or we could create and integrate something a little bit better. In my experience with people, visionaries, integrators, coaching teams, all of that, when we go to do this thing of asking for the feedback, holding space for another narrative, it buds up against childhood trauma. Because do
Mm-hmm.
I trust you to enter my psychological sandbox, play nice in my psychological sandbox, and then let me make the final psychological decision in my psychological sandbox? But what we have done as a society sometimes is pounded into each other's heads an alternative perspective that the other person then is just like blocking the whole way. So since it's hitting the core trust issue, which typically is the core childhood wound, which Brian Tracy says you spend the first 50 years of your life recovering from the first 5. So if you're hitting that core wound of trust when you're trying to challenge your perspective, you're trying to build a more intimate relationships, you're trying to organize and scale your business, how do you heal that trust thing and then go choose people you can trust to jump in your psychological sandbox to help you evolve?
That's a tough one because I wouldn't say I'm qualified to really answer that one for certain, but I know for me, like I mentioned, I was starting to do some hypnotherapy, but finally finding somebody who actually didn't like throw their own trauma and their own weird
Right.
stuff into me when they're doing hypnotherapy, because that's a very vulnerable place to be, right? You have to have a lot of trust to let someone do it. And of course, it's not like I'm going unconscious. It's not like the stage show hypnotherapy, right? You're very conscious, you know what's going on. But I think for me, that's been one thing that's been huge, because it's one thing to try to become aware of something consciously, say, yes, I'm doing this. I don't trust people, right? It's another thing to actually do it, right? And part of the problem is too, especially if you keep saying, I don't trust people, you will always not trust people, right? You have an identity. Like, for example, for me, a lot of what changed within me as a runner was I stopped saying, when people would say, oh, you're a runner, huh? I was like, no, I'm not a runner. I just run for fun or whatever. Eventually I started saying like, no, I am a runner. And now I even say like, no, I'm an athlete, because now I'm like in the top echelon of runners worldwide. And no, I wasn't there initially, but I had to identify as being somebody who is an athlete. Because if you identify saying, well, I'm an athlete, it's like the movie Secondhand Lions. I don't know if you've ever seen that one.
I know.
It's from about like 15 or so years ago with Robert Duvall and Michael Caine. But they were old guys sitting on the farm, and they had all this money, but they weren't doing anything with it. They were sitting on it. And then finally they just said, well, this is what old guys do. This is what retired people do. And so they went and they got a farm, and they went and they did this. Eventually they bought an airplane, right? Because they're like, I'm going to do this now, right? That's just what retired people do, and that's kind of what it is. Like when you identify as something, like when I identify as an athlete, especially this is in the last year, I said, you know what? I'm an athlete. So what does that mean? I work out daily. Like when people say, well, do you take days off? No, I'm an athlete. I do it daily, right? If you're someone who's always working on your mindset, or you're working on learning, hey, well, what days do you read? Every day. That's what I do. I'm a learner, right? I'm a student, I'm a teacher, whatever it might be, right? You identify that daily. So that has to be the start, especially if you want to trust people, you got to start by saying, you know what? I've struggled with this, but I do trust people. Like I trust the right people. You might even say that, like, just even be more honest with it. That's one thing I've noticed with some affirmation type statements, that people will say things that they know in their heart's not true. And that's why it never becomes reality. But if I say a statement and say, listen, no, I can trust people. I got to trust the right people, and that better mean nobody, but it's like, yeah, if I feel safe with somebody, I trust people, when I've built a relationship with somebody, I trust people. I'm a very trusting person. You can say that and still be honest and identify with that. And that's the first stage. Now, if you do all that and you're still running to blocks, that's where I run into those subconscious blocks that are like from childhood traumas and things like that you just cannot get rid of. That's where things like hypnotherapy and work and counseling, or whatever therapy you feel like it works for you, do that. I would just give you this recommendation. When I'm looking at hiring somebody, whether it's to coach me, to mentor me, or to work with me, these are three things I look for. Besides the fact that, I don't even necessarily look for like, are they where I want to be, right? I mean, there is some of that too, but more specifically, I like to know that those people have been there, they've done that, and they're still doing it today. Like that's what I look for in a mentor, right? Like you mentioned Kiyosaki. Like Kiyosaki is an amazing guy teaching good concepts, but I would not consider him as a guy still doing it today. And again, like he's kind of, he's gotten older. I don't know what's going on in his head, but the last few years have been a little bit interesting watching him. It's almost like watching an episode of The Apprentice, or as we call it, the 2016 election, but it's like, wow, there's never a dull moment with this guy's life, but that's the thing. Like I like to see the people that they actually have done what they're saying they're going to do, but they're still actively doing it today. Like they're still learning and growing themselves, right? They don't even have to be perfect. They just have to be just ahead of where I am, and I've done that. Like when I mentored people, like in the last recession, and so you understand a little bit of my backstory. I actually started out as a financial advisor, right? Did that for 4 years. And part of what inspired me to do it was my dad, who actually just turned 80. I just went to visit him last week in Oregon, surprised him for his 80th birthday. I even got him a signed autographed photo of Johnny Cash, which blew his mind. His karaoke moniker is Ronnie Cash, right? Because he would always go and do Johnny Cash songs when he did karaoke. Well, now he's bedridden. He can't really go anywhere. He's on he uses a walker. So, he can't get out. So I haven't seen him in 2 years. But in any case, like part of what inspired me to become a financial advisor was my dad. Not that he was one, but I remember him always saying to us as kids, like the kind of the childhood money beliefs, right? He would always say things like, hey, we can't afford this. What do you think I am, made of money? Money doesn't grow on trees, My favorite was, hey, I gave up that Corvette to have you kids, right? Which is, does wonders for your personal value, again, not his fault, but obviously you got to work on your own. Like, I don't know. I tell my kids all the time, like, hey, I'm creating traumas for you guys all the time. So you're going to have to do your own therapy when you get older. But yeah, like that kind of stuff affected me. And I thought, and then even worse, he would even say, you know what, this job will literally kill me. I will work until I die. And even he had strokes in his 40s, heart attacks in his 50s. I mean, he was not expected to make it to 70. And so I became a financial advisor thinking, if I can give him 1 year of his life back, wouldn't that be worth it? Well, 4 years into being a financial advisor, he says, well, you going to advise me now? So I sat down with him at his table and understand this guy. Remember, he's not just talking about we can't afford this stuff, but he's also like the penny pinching, like you cannot buy anything at full retail price kind of spender, right? He is the ultimate penny pinching saver.
Mhm.
So he did that. He paid off all of his debt, including his house, in 18 years. He had saved up money in his 401k like every good boy and little girl should. And guess what? I told him, I said, Dad, if you want to retire today when you're 61 years old, you better hope you die in 5 years, because that's when you're going to run out of money. He said, that's not what I want to hear. What else do I do? And I said, I don't know. You did everything right from my perspective at that time as a financial advisor. Well, when the student's ready, the teacher appears. A few weeks later, I'm talking with a friend that I hired to be a financial advisor, but then left to go do real estate investing. He's telling me about him and his dad partnered on some real estate deals. His dad's now doubled his income from his active job. I said, well, there's no way. That's too good to be true. You've only been doing this for 4 or 5 months. That's impossible. It's like, is it? He says, Chris, let me ask you a question. How many of your clients are really financially free where they don't worry about money? Well, none. They all worry about money. Right. How about this, Chris? How many of you guys as financial advisors are financially free, not off the commissions you're earning, but actually doing these investments? And then I knew he got me, because I knew there was guys working there since the late 1970s and still couldn't retire. And I said, well, none. I don't think any of them can retire. There's your problem, Chris. And that's where it got my perspective to open up. And by the way, he didn't think I'd be open. He did say, he's like, Chris, if you're serious, go read the book by Kiyosaki called Who Took My Money, which basically just says mutual funds stink, because he knew I was selling mutual funds. Mm-hmm. And then 2, he's like, listen to this radio show that these real estate investors do. It was like an AM talk radio show here locally in Utah. And so I did. And a few months later, I quit being a financial advisor. And then, of course, from there, even months later after that, I had enough passive income coming in that I was able to retire when I was 28 years old. And I thought, well, that was crazy easy, like way easier than I expected. I thought I'd have to work my tail off till I was 40 by scrimping and saving in my mutual funds, and then I could live off $5,000 a month. And here I was living on $4,000 or $5,000 a month at 28, not 40, And so after a while, I was trying to figure out, what do I do with my life? Because all my friends still work jobs. I can't hang out with them in the middle of the day. So what do I do? And so naturally I went to teaching, because that's the thing. I was teaching ballroom even on the side at the time. I love teaching. And so I actually came out of retirement in 2007 to start teaching people. Well, that's when the recession hit. And our business got affected because we were teaching real estate investors who were all going broke at the time. I also threw all my money in that. Plus my real estate was starting to go bad at the time. So I was getting hit from all sides. And that's where I went from millionaire to upside down millionaire, meaning I was over $1 million in debt, right? It's kind of like when Donald Trump said that, he told his girlfriend at the time, he said, hey, look, see that homeless guy on the street? He's $900 million richer than I am, because he was $900 million in debt, right? He was almost bankrupt in 1992. And so that's where I kind of was too. Mine was only about $1 million, right? His was 900 million, but still it was pretty overwhelming. And at that time, to kind of stay in alignment with my identity, I realized I couldn't just teach people how to get out of the rat race when I was back in it, because I had been there, done that, but I wasn't doing it anymore today. So instead, what I did is I started teaching them about what I was actually doing, which was getting resourceful, how to find the money. Because the many things that people were saying, and again, coming back to that value creation, right? Like, how do you create value? What can you do to serve people, solve problems? That money's a natural exchange. Well, I was thinking, well, what are they asking? Well, they're all saying, Chris, the things you teach about sound great. I just don't have the money to pay you. And in the back of my mind, I wouldn't say this verbally, because I'm not stupid, but in the back of my mind, I'd say, well, man, my situation is way worse than yours. I bet you I could find the money. So I would tell them, I said, listen, if I can help find the money, would you then pay me? They said, well, yeah, of course. If you can actually pull the money out of my butt somewhere, I'll do it. And they did. And I would like say, great, if you do this, or you do this, or you pay off debt this way, or if we do this instead, or you just save on taxes or whatever it would be, right? I would start to help them find money, and then they would pay me. And that eventually became a process that our company that we had there with some of these partners, it was almost bankrupt in 2009. But by 2010, we went to over 5 million in revenue that next year, because all of a sudden we got it to the right relationships, creating the right value for those people, and it took off, right? And it was all because, and I wasn't teaching anything about getting out of the rat race like I do today. Today, I teach that now because what did I do? In 2016, end of 2016, I was back out of the rat race. So I started teaching people about 2015, 2016. As I was doing it, here's how you also not just free up cash flow, especially as a business owner, but here's how you actually get out of the rat race where you're work optional. You can work because you want to, not because you have to. And I think that's key, is that if you're going to hire anybody for anything, right, is find those people that have been there, done that, and then still doing it today.
Your story is amazing, and also a testament to the grit and character you developed along the journey. I heard this quote from a Dubai billionaire, and he says, Fast growth builds ego. Slow growth builds character.
Ooh, I love that.
Yeah, it really resonated with me as well, because sometimes when the government prints money and everyone's like just a free for all, we're all chasing different things, it can build the ego. And then
Mhm.
when all the chips fall and you have to have the grit and the resilience and you have to dig yourself out of financial debt, 900 million or a million, you develop character. And that character is a bedrock for whatever you do next. That's the thing that builds that core. I feel like the core is really your character in your alignment within yourself.
So true.
So taking your story just one step further, because when you dug yourself out of that hole, you built a company and you were doing it yourself. You were a one-man show, and then you had to get to a place where you picked a role. Like, am I going to be the visionary or am I going to be the integrator? And then
Mhm.
you had to go find someone to collaborate with. How did that evolve for you?
Yeah, so it's fascinating because I had financial freedom dates, right? I had
Mhm.
2006, and then I had end of 2016, December 2016, and so 2017. I remember I was at this point, like, I didn't even have a virtual assistant anymore, right? I was kind of part time in 2017. I was actually like really spending a few months in California just snowbirding, just leaving the Utah winters and things like that. We've done that every year since, of leaving Utah in the wintertime. But we were in California, in Southern California, and staying there for a few months. And while I was there, I could feel like I was getting bored, right? One thing that people always ask me, they're like, "Yeah, but why do you keep working? Like, you don't have to work anymore. You're making like 40 or 50,000 a month passively. Why do you keep working?" And it's like, well, you've never been free. You would never know.
Mhm.
If you've been free, you would understand that it's not about the freedom, it's about purpose, right? And for me, if I only work like 5 hours a week, my fire dies, it burns out. But if I work 40 hours a week, I burn out, right? And so you have to find that balance, like what still keeps your fire lit and passionate about life, but doesn't burn you out at the same time. For me, it's like 10 to 20 hours a week and doing what I love, right? And so, by the way, I'm more than that now, because now all of a sudden things are exploding like crazy. So that's why this kind of happened, because right around like after 2020, I was, people had more time on their hands because they couldn't go anywhere, right? I was like, maybe I should buy a franchise, because my business had already been built up to over a 7-figure business at this point, but I was doing it all part time. I was literally working 10 or 20 hours a week. And people were like, how do you do that? I was like, I just like efficiency. Like, I like to, create leverage and things like that, and then, but then about 2020, I was like, well, maybe I should buy a franchise. But by the time I looked into franchise models, even the ones that are quote unquote passive, they weren't that passive, to the point where I said, I can double down on my business, have more control, and probably make more money than I would in a franchise. So I decided to double down on my business. And about 2021, I realized I can't do this alone. Like, I could already see the writing on the wall. Like, our podcast was growing bigger and bigger. We've already got the top 1% of all podcasts worldwide. And it just kept expanding and growing. I'm like, now people are reaching out and it's all me.
Mhm.
And so I realized I had to have people coming on. So I brought in like another coach to help coach people on the consulting side. We had a whole new, like a, insurance division of our business. So we call it with infinite banking and things like that. And so that was exploding. So I eventually brought a guy on in 2022 to do that. In 2021, I was trying to figure out what to do. And I thought maybe I should get a sales manager. And somebody actually said, they're like, well, EOS, right? We have some friends that do, that kind of stuff. Have you read books like Traction or Rocket Fuel? And I'm like, well, I read one of them, but I need to read both. I realized pretty quickly Rocket Fuel was my book, not Traction as much. So when I
So
started with
you're a
somebody on,
visionary.
yeah, I'm the visionary, right? But it's funny because according to my predictive index, I'm an individualist. Like, he basically just told me, the coach was like, listen, you could actually be your own integrator if you wanted to be. What do you want? And I said, I read Rocket Fuel. That's my book. I'm a visionary. I'm not the million idea kind of guy. Like, I'm a very weird kind of visionary that way. I'm more like a Steve Trang, if you know who he is, like in the real estate space. Like, we're both individualists. We don't have to create millions of ideas. We almost eliminate our ideas before they even get out in public, right? We're like always, discerning more than anything. And so yeah, I was like, okay, I'll do that. I need an integrator, but I need an integrator who's apparently more sociable than I am, because apparently I'm more introverted than I thought I was. And so I got somebody who was my integrator, that's my CMO, but also doubles as my integrator and kind of helps balance me out. She's a lot like me, but not the same.
Mhm.
And since then, I've had to build out, now operational people, because then we found out we had all these social butterflies, but we didn't have anybody who actually was getting crap done. So we had
Mhm.
to get somebody in to do that and kind of crack the whip occasionally, and we've had to build out a team where it used to be just me to now a team of 10 people. And it's kind of fun. I never thought I'd have this much fun in a business, but when you start to really, I really like to do the whole, I look at my team almost like Pokemon cards. It's like, can I collect them all? So if I find someone with unique abilities and gifts, I'm like, how can I get them on my team? Because that
Mhm.
would round it out. Oh, that'd be an interesting addition to my collection, right? And so I try not to hire too much. I like to be a small shop and keep things very tight. But at the same time, when you see talent, when you
Mhm.
get the right talent, especially when you get those A players, it's amazing what you can do for your business.
So this integrator that you have aligned with,
Hmm.
I feel like getting the visionary integrator relationship just right is so critical.
Yeah.
And it requires so much trust. I feel like trust is the most critical thing because it is the closest thing to almost a marriage you would have in business, because you have to be able to stay in your lane, trust and respect the differences, even if you don't understand, because one's right brain, one's left brain, and be able to come to some sacred agreement and execute from there without end runs or backstabbing or blaming or anything, what I call pink elephants, not being talked about, because you have to have everything above the table, authentic, transparent. So when you were identifying this integrator, is this someone you knew before that you had a relationship with, or was it some stranger that just is serendipitously lined up for you?
It was definitely more the latter. It was more of a godsend, if anything.
Mhm.
It was so I hired that same EOS company. They had a hiring division, so they would use, they send out all the resumes and blast on like LinkedIn jobs and everywhere else, right? And they would actually have a whole scoring system of, how much do they fit the predictive index that they were looking for. Plus, I wanted somebody in the marketing space too, right? So how do we find both integrator and a marketer? And funny enough, like for her, on her perspective, and we've done a few podcasts together, but when she was talking about it, she said she was actually looking for something more virtual in 2021 because she just had her second kid. She realized that going into the office every day wasn't what she's wanting. So she was looking for a position, and the first one that popped up was my ad for that hiring position. And so it was the only one she applied for. And when they narrowed it down, they were surprised. They're like, we hope we get some candidates here. We had 240 candidates that were wanting that position. Maybe it was perfect timing because 2021, everybody was wanting to go
Yeah.
remote. And we hired it as say, this is all remote. Our company is fully remote with what we do. And so we had 240 candidates. They narrowed it down to the top 5 for me, fortunately, because that would have been nuts for me to try to do that myself. Um, and right when we had our interview, her and I had our interview, we knew, like, we were like, it wasn't even like an interview. In fact, I mean, I was more nervous than I think she was, because I'm like, okay, I'm trying to find my perfect match,
Yeah.
right? And even just talking to her, I was like, it just felt like a normal conversation. She even cried during part of it. As I was asking, like, who are the people that inspired you the most, and because I'm trying to understand her core values, and they perfectly aligned with who I was. And I even told the guys, I said, hey, I know I interviewed these 5 people, but I think I found her. Well, you can't hire her right off the bat. You got to do at least 2 or 3 more interviews before you officially hire her. I'm like, fine, I'll do it. Like, give me down the top 3. All right, great. Now it's her, still her, and finally I hired her and everything. And it was awesome. Like, it's been an awesome match. And actually somebody, I mean, don't tell her this, but somebody I could actually see potentially taking over my company if I were out, or if I were just in the owner box, like having her run things. Like, it's just amazing.
I love it. So now, with the whole history you've had and what you're looking at into your future, how would
Mhm.
you define success?
I think kind of coming back full circle what we were talking about, right? I think success is being the best version of who you truly are and using it in the service of others. I think that's really what success really is, what kind of footprint do you leave on this planet? I know Steve Jobs talked about that, right? It's like, whose lives are you impacting and blessing along the way? And that's actually why our company's name is called Money Ripples. It's that ripple effect. Like, when you create financial freedom for yourself, you stop looking at just taking care of you and your family, which is kind of a self-centered type of view. Even if you think looking at your family is not selfish, it really kind of is, right? It's still your own household. When you can start looking outside of yourself and what kind of ripple effect you can create through your community, the country, and across the world, that's when like there's that expansion, right? Where the world's a better place because you were in it versus you making it worse by having you in it, right? By being a creator, not a consumer. And so I think that's the real definition of success. There's being truly who you are, the best version of it, while serving other people and blessing more lives.
Wow. I just got this vision of you, and it's like you are being successful.
Mhm.
Like success is a way of being, not a
Yeah,
destination. And I think sometimes we get that mixed up, and you're
that's right.
doing it.
That's right.
Love it.
Yeah, you don't have to be a multi-billionaire to do that. Like you could be at any level, any place. You could be flat broke. I mean, that's the thing I learned when I was flat broke is that I could still help another person. I could still give a lending ear. I could still shovel somebody's driveway if it snows, right? Like just, shovel a neighbor's driveway just to do that. Like you could do things to make a person's day better
Mhm.
and create this ripple effect in people's lives. You do not have to be wealthy. Being wealthy helps, but it's not a requirement.
Yeah. What projects are you currently excited about?
I'm actually excited that for the first time ever, speaking of identity, I would always tell people that, well, besides one, I'm bad at technology. Two, that I hate writing. Right. That's why I do podcasting because it's so much easier to speak it. And but then we have this interview. It's like, oh, there's some good nuggets here. What if we transcribe that? But I
Mhm.
never quite found a system that did it right. Finally, one of my friends who also serendipitously was in the real estate game now is looking to switch towards writing books. He actually wrote a book for Russell Brunson in a week
Oh,
and
wow.
did better than his marketing guy was able to do for him. And I said, okay, dude, I'm hiring you. He's like, no, I'm just starting this. I'm like, I'm your first person besides Russell. I'm like, I'm going to be your first person. And so I'm actually writing a book right now to really kind of teach about this stuff, like almost like its own. I mean, I wouldn't call it like a rich dad, poor dad of sorts. It's more like a rich dad, poor dad, but a way to actually apply it and make it work in life.
I love that. Well, if people are interested in following along and seeing this book unfold and all the wisdom come out of it, where can people connect with you?
Yeah, especially because it's going to come out in the fall. So the best way to do that is go to moneyripples.com, follow us there. You can also follow our Money Ripples podcast anywhere you consume podcasts or on YouTube or wherever you do that.
Well, it was really a pleasure having you on. I can see how the struggles you've had in your life and the pain that you've encountered and the things that didn't pan out the way you thought they were going to pan out helped you transcend the circumstances, integrate them, and then create something where you can truly serve people and help them bear fruit in their lives. And you're doing it. So like you're already successful and you're being successful. And so I'm so grateful to have had you on, had this conversation, and I'm excited to cheer for you along your journey. So thank you for being here.
Oh, it's been my honor. It's one of my favorite conversations. I really appreciate it, Stacy.
Thank you. And to everyone who's watching, I hope that this inspires you to build businesses from a very rooted place within yourself where you're already enough, you're already complete, and you're doing it out of purpose because people do really need the gift that you have. And I hope that you can integrate the dream into the doing and get shit done while you stay rooted because we are rooting for you. Cheers, y'all.